and welcome to Hypnotize Me, the podcast about hypnosis, transformation, and healing. This is Dr. Elizabeth Bonet, and I'm your host. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health treatment, nor should it be. If you need therapy or hypnotherapy, please seek a trained professional. I do hypnosis all over the world, so if you'd like to learn more about me, you can do that at my website, drlizhypnosis.com. That's DRLIZ hypnosis.com. Now on to our episode. Hi, Hypnotize Me listeners. This is Dr. Liz. This is a wonderful day. My daughter woke up and made angel food cake, and the whole house smelled wonderful. So that's what's happening while I'm recording this. This week's interview is with Mike Bundrant, who is an NLP Master Practitioner and Trainer. NLP is neuro-linguistic programming. NLP is really a sister to hypnosis. I think the fields contribute to each other, but definitely a lot of the language that I feel gets used in hypnosis came from NLP over the years, although some people may say the opposite. But this is quite a friendly interview. It's very enjoyable, and I experienced Mike as very grounded. He's the father of 8 kids, so he does give a parenting tip at the end. And let me give you some of his background here. He has been an NLP Master Practitioner and Trainer since 1993, and he and his wife were the first to launch NLP courses and certification programs online. So their institute is one of the leading online programs. Their center offers NLP, hypnosis, and life coach training. And we talk about all the differences of those. And a good portion of the interview talks about self-sabotage, which is one of Mike's specialties. So that's quite an interesting discussion. Now, we do start off talking about artists and processing, but eventually we get to NLP, self-sabotage, and parenting. Before we jump into the interview, I want to remind you that this episode is sponsored by astrologer Rachel Middleton. She's an amazing astrologer. Her prices are really reasonable, and she's so friendly and down to earth and so easy to talk to. If you've never had an astrology consult, she would be the one to call. She will put you right at ease, as well as probably make you laugh. She is actually one of the funniest people I've ever met. And at one point, all of her friends were trying to encourage her to do stand-up comedy. She is so funny. But astrology can be helpful to help you understand something that happened in the past, something that's going on now, or to plan for the future. You can contact her at firstmagnitude@gmail.com or see more about her on Medium, and that's medium.com/iHeartAstrology. And mention Dr. Liz or the Hypnotize Me podcast for a 10% discount on an astrology consultation. All right, let's jump into our interview. Hi, Mike. Welcome to the Hypnotize Me podcast.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Glad to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
Yes, I'm so happy you're here. For the listeners, we're here with Mike Bundrant, and he has quite the body of work around hypnosis, NLP, all kinds of various topics, and life coaching as well. And you've run the, is it iNLP? The I is for like...
Yes,
okay.
For international.
International, okay.
Yeah, iNLP Center. We have students in over 70 countries now. So
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. How long have you had it online, the Institute?
The online is since 2011. It started, I actually took my first NLP training, which stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. It's sort of a cousin, if you will, of hypnosis. Mm-hmm. I started training NLP practitioners in 1995, and it wasn't until 2011 that my wife convinced me to start creating some online courses. I was skeptical, but it was best decision we ever made. Really, really wonderful journey since then.
Do you find that obviously there's differences between in-person training and online training. And I've actually done quite a few courses online for hypnosis, but
Mm-hmm.
my basic training was done in person.
Mm-hmm.
So what differences do you see in terms of doing it online versus in person?
There's some pretty significant differences. And as I said, I was skeptical that the material that you're learning could actually be integrated into your day-to-day real life through online learning. I've since proven that wrong and have come to the conclusion that online skill-based learning can actually be much more effective than in person. And so the case for that that we've discovered is that, first of all, the learning is on your own time, at your own pace, and so on and so forth. It's not like going to a training and then several days in a row or what have you, drinking out of the fire hose and then coming home and you're supposed to do something with it, right?
True. Mm-hmm.
Online, it's like you're little 10 and 15-minute segments at a time, small chunks, and you integrate it at your own pace. And the other thing we found is that with the challenge of, well, how do you integrate it into day-to-day life? We designed a series of exercises. We call them psyche builders and stealth missions, and we give them cute names. But after each learning module or skill, we have them go and practice in the context of their daily life. And so one NLP trainer, that's a colleague of mine, said, it's like your life is the classroom, right? Mm-hmm. And we sort of help them turn their life into a learning laboratory. And that is really, really interesting in that when you're practicing the skills and so on and so forth, you're doing it with real people in your real life and not just with other students in a training room. And so it really works out with that and with sort of unlimited live online classes, and your training actually never has to end. You can continue to take the training, take the classes forever. We have that capacity since it's online. Mm-hmm. People actually end up learning it more thoroughly than, in my experience, just 20 years or so teaching trainings in person, kind of one-shot deals.
Yeah, I totally believe that. And that's fascinating because often the experience I experience this myself, but then I hear this from other people who have learned hypnosis or NLP. They've gone to some kind of training and they get home and they're like, now what? Like, what do we do now?
That's right.
They feel sort of overwhelmed even. Like, how do I even start? So
exactly.
You're talking about really chunking the learning and they get to pace it at their own pace, like the way that they learn best.
Exactly. And it is, chunking the learning, pacing at their own pace when they want. So when they're in the mood, in their own space and so forth, there's none of this, we just had lunch and it's on day 3 of the training. And the afternoon I'm in a lull, but I am sitting here through this class. And there's none of that stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So just huge advantages. There are people that it doesn't really work for. And I would say that is sort of more for people who are technologically challenged, or they just need in-person contact in order for learning to take place. We all need in-person contact. Mm-hmm. I've come to believe that some people need in-person contact for meaningful learning to take place. And there are people for whom the online learning doesn't work for those kinds of reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess my question is, would that be more of like a kinetic kind of processor, like someone who really needs to be hands-on?
Yeah, it's really interesting. A hands-on sort of learn by doing, sort of being walked through the process. And NLP, we would call that a kinesthetic, feeling-oriented process. Or I don't learn just by watching or hearing. I learn by doing and actually being walked through the process in person. So it could be that, and it could be something that it's a really interesting question, but there is something about live versus digital, right?
Yes.
Where there's something, obviously different about that. And I can't put my finger on it, but I think with some people, a more meaningful learning kicks in when it's live. And I don't know what percentage of people it is, but it's sort of like some people get into an online course and it's like I'm staring at my computer screen. It's like they're not seeing through the technology or the gadgetry into the world of learning possibilities and sort of connecting ideas and so forth. They just sort of can't get past that and need to be in a live learning situation. I don't know what you call that. But it could be a kinesthetic learning style. Sure. That could be it exactly.
It's really interesting. I have a 17-year-old. She's a senior, and she really cannot stand the online classes.
Mm-hmm.
And she also loves paper books, which is quite unusual for her generation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always interested in this, like, why is it that some people really love online learning? I love online learning myself, and then other people just don't take to it. And I imagine it is something going on there that they need and like the in-person contact, and that's how they really process better.
Yeah, contact, presence. Again, these are feeling-oriented words. With someone who prefers traditional books, if you think of the heft of the book, the tactile sensation, flipping through the pages, it's a different kind of sensory experience than digital stuff. And again, there are people who, it's interesting that your daughter as a teenager that has that. It suggests that, it's not like she was raised in an old school world.
No, right. She's a digital native.
Yeah. Right. So again, it would be interesting to learn more about what she experienced. Actually, there would be a way to kind of find out, which is to sit down with her and give her a Kindle or something and have her flip through it and sort of elicit what is her visual, auditory, and kinesthetic experience, and then give her a real book to flip through and elicit what is her visual, auditory, and kinesthetic experience, and compare and contrast and find out what that is. That would actually be really interesting.
It would, yes. And now that I'm thinking about her, it's like she's an artist. She loves to create with her hands, and that lends itself more, right, to the in-person experience. But the one kind of thing she will do online is watch artist videos, like obsessively. They have all these artist videos about how to draw something or how to make something, that kind of thing. So it's a little bit of a contrast.
Artists, I find, are interesting too in terms of NLP, because with NLP, one of our models is called the VAK model, which is, our world is made up of things that we see, hear, and feel, both on the inside and outside. And when you start to deconstruct somebody's inner experience in terms of what they see, hear, and feel on the inside, it's often very revealing. And the clients who I've had that are artists, because this isn't a scientific study or anything, it may be just a coincidence, but everyone was predominantly kinesthetic. So that was their preferred modality. And it was surprising to me by the time I got to like my third client, who was an artist who was really a feeling-oriented person, and there they are painting. It's like, it's really, really interesting. I would think, well, it's all visual, but I found that they create from their feelings. And
Yes.
in the absence of that, there is no creativity, right?
Yes, absolutely. I've had the same experience where originally when artists would come into my office and I would assume that they're visual, and it turns out that most of them are not. They absolutely
Exactly.
fell into the kinesthetic category.
Yeah, I think so. I think creativity is, everything is all three. Creativity is visual, auditory, and kinesthetic.
Yes.
But at times of, I tend to be more creative when I'm in pain emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the poetry comes out. That's when, the more in-depth writing comes out. And I think that's true in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So can you explain to the listeners, we sort of, this interview always takes its own path, right? All of them do.
Sure.
But I'm going to change tracks here a little bit. Can you explain to the listeners the difference between neurolinguistic programming and, let's say, hypnosis or life coaching, those three? I know you offer all three on your website.
Yes. So as I see it, if we start with maybe the difference between NLP and hypnosis, and then on the hypnosis side of it, I would say you know more about hypnosis than I do. Mm-hmm. So correct me on feel free to correct me if I'm off a little bit about the hypnosis part. But one of the NLP was created by going out and finding very talented or gifted healers, psychotherapists, and such that were just doing amazing work above and beyond their class. One of those healers was Dr. Milton Erickson. He was a medical doctor, psychiatrist, and he was one of the pioneers in hypnotherapy, and he would just get these amazing results with his patients, things that, people at the time sort of didn't think were possible. And he did it. He had this sort of uncanny ability to put people in a trance and just sort of reorganize their thinking and so forth. And so the NLP developers went and hung out with Milton Erickson. And they were doing what they called modeling, which is, let's figure out what this gifted person does, deconstruct it and break it down and turn it into something that's teachable. Mm. And so a lot of the NLP techniques, so for example, the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic model, it's, when you think of, let's say, a problem that you have, what image are you aware of on the inside? What sounds, or what are you saying to yourself? What feelings that you have are you having? And those internal images, sounds, and feelings, they have a structure. If you have an image, it has qualities. It's either a large image or a small image, or it's close up, or it's far away, or it's a movie or a still shot. There's all these different qualities of experience. And so as NLP developers modeled psychotherapists and Milton Erickson, Virginia Satir, Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt therapy, they were able to come up with these systems or formulas that were extracted from their work. And so in hypnosis, for example, you might induce a trance, and the person's relaxed and their conscious mind is sort of preoccupied, sent away, and you offer some post-hypnotic suggestions, some sort of internal restructuring of their experience and so forth, and provided that they accept that and so on and so forth, and they go along their way. Well, with NLP, you might do this similar kind of work, only without the formal trance induction. So if I'm working with a client and they're sort of describing a state, a mindset, or what have you, in which they're stuck, I might, again, with rapport and so forth, might say, when you think of that state and you're stuck, what do you see, hear, or feel on the inside? And then we'll just go right to that internal experience and start restructuring it. And it just becoming aware at that level does induce a light trance, but there's no formal trance induction. So many people think of NLP as hypnosis without the trance induction. It's simplistic. It's not entirely true, but that's one way to think about it.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful explanation that you gave, by the way, is this difference between, a formal trance and, let's say, a informal trance, right? Mm-hmm. So the NLP practitioner is mainly just talking to somebody. You're not doing okay, let's go into the relaxed state and, focus on your hands and slow down your breathing and wave of relaxation, all that stuff that a hypnosis practitioner generally does. Often. It depends on how they practice, of course, but often they'll do that. So are people seeking out NLP practitioners versus therapists, let's say, because a therapist just sits and talks to you too, right? And we do restructuring that way. Right. And some people would call that the therapy trance. I do, right? But the client's not necessarily put into a trance like you are in hypnosis.
Right.
So what's the difference there between, let's say, someone who says, yeah, I'm going to go see a therapist versus someone who says, I'm going to go see an NLP practitioner?
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So I would say anymore, this is maybe 10 years ago, certainly 15, 20 years ago, there were more people who would go get NLP training and then hang out a shingle as an NLP practitioner, right? And that was before life coaching caught on, right?
Yes.
Now, the vast majority of people, in fact, as I think through our students, I cannot think of one who's coming to get NLP training to be an NLP practitioner and hang out a shingle. The people who take our NLP training are already life coaches or therapists, or they're working in business, human resources, the medical field, what have you, and they're coming just to add the NLP communication skills to their repertoire and support what they're already doing.
Got it. Okay.
People are saying, I want to be a life coach. Mm-hmm. And so they're getting life coach training, and based on that life coach training, hanging out their shingle. And a lot of them are doing it as an alternative to becoming a therapist, a counselor. Mm-hmm. Because, for a variety of reasons, I don't want to work in the system. It's too, bureaucratic, too much red tape. It takes too long. Yes. I want to do a different kind of work, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really life coaching, which people are wanting to establish themselves as.
Okay, got it. Yeah, those were similar questions when I left the field for about 10 years, and I didn't get licensed after I graduated with my PhD. And when I went back, I spent, I would say, many months deciding, should I get licensed and be a therapist, or should I be a life coach? Because it seems like a shortcut, and an effective one. But some of that depends on what kind of clients you want to work with too. And so ultimately.
Exactly. And I really, when people are thinking of it as a shortcut, it's a little bit of a concern, right? Because we don't want there to be a fast track to people suddenly taking on clients that, where they're in over their head, the clients aren't served that way. And so to address, I think, a part of your question I heard earlier, which is, what are the differences? We really emphasize this. Life coaching is not therapy.
Yes, right.
And that there is a clear legal line in the sand, and that legal line has to do with a diagnosis. Mm-hmm. well, first of all, as a life coach, you have no business throwing around diagnostic words like major depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. And so you have no business talking about those things. And if a client brings those up, you have no business directly or indirectly treating that if a diagnosis comes up as a life coach, you must say, I am not a clinician. Mm-hmm. I'm not a doctor or mental health counselor, and therefore I don't treat that particular condition. However, so you'll need to go to a therapist or a psychiatrist, somebody qualified to treat that. And if you want to see me as well, I am happy to be part of that. Have your therapist, aware that I'm also working with you and share information and so forth, with the release of information and that kind of thing. So we really caution people to don't go there, right? We're not competing, even though I think a lot of people in the therapy community, therapists don't like life coaches because they're like, we're encroaching, right? A little bit on, clients are opting to see life coaches as opposed to therapists and so forth. But
I think it
shouldn't be competing.
It really depends on your perspective. Like ultimately I chose the path of a therapist because I did want to work with deeper issues, and I did want to do more of that depth work. And I think you're right. Some of the field does feel like life coaching is encroaching, but I feel like that's a limited perspective. Like we work often with different populations, different tasks, different feelings, different goal states, right? Of this versus that. And also I tend to think that's coming from a poverty kind of mindset. Like people really find what they need along the way.
Right.
And so there's an abundance there. There's an abundance mindset that someone could have as well I truly feel that clients find me for different spiritual reasons. Sometimes they need a life coach. Sometimes they need me. Sometimes, I don't know, they need some other kind of practitioner, right? Acupuncture or Western medicine. I don't know, anymore. A shaman, who knows, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a brilliant observation, the abundance mindset, because my background is mental health counseling, and I left the mental health counseling field for training life coaching and practicing life coaching. But I think life coaches and counselors, we're all really on the same team. We're playing different roles, but we're all in this together in order to serve people who need our services. So we should be referring back and forth and really considering ourselves all part of the on the same team, right?
Absolutely, yes. So when would you recommend that a therapist refer to a life coach?
That's an interesting question. On principle, I would say that if it's in an area, this is a vague answer, but if it's in an area the therapist doesn't want to work with and a life coach can, such as goal setting and accountability and motivation, and those kinds of things, by all means, refer out to a life coach. A therapist actually has more flexibility than a life coach in that a therapist certainly can work with clients on all of the above. It's the life coach that has to draw the line, where a therapist doesn't necessarily have to. But referring out to a life coach for those things that life coaches are sort of typically known for, about sort of goal setting. Yes. What is my purpose in life? What are my life values? What's most important to me? How do I create more balance in my life? And how do I find more fulfillment? And so, as opposed to sort of fixing emotional problems, how do we go from neutral into something wonderful, right? And again, therapists can do that too. But they may or may not have the training themselves. If a client needs, say, a life values inventory or something along those lines. I mean, so many coaches know how to do life values work.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right. It depends on the interest level too, because I have quite a bit of interest in like career change and have done that several times myself and started several businesses. But I was part of this business group, and it became very clear to me, like, I have no interest in helping walk someone through those early stages of a business anymore. Like at one point I did,
Right.
but it's like, no,
Right.
go hire someone, set up your website, and call me back.
Right.
Like my interest really lies in deeper healing. It's what I found through being part of that. So in that case, it's like that's something I'd refer out to. Like if you really can't get that done, then get a life coach. Get someone who can really do that type of work with you. And if you're getting stuck with the life coach and it's for emotional reasons, let's look at that. So I know you talk quite a bit about self-sabotage. How do you see it, or how do you work with people around self-sabotage?
Well, I have a kind of a radical way of working with self-sabotage, which will sound a little bit insane out of context.
Okay, great. I'm all for it.
Right? In context, with a little bit of context provided, it's really intriguing. So when I hear the word self-sabotage, that to me, that is a code word for unconscious goals. It's sort of like some part of you, probably an unconscious part of you that you're not aware of or not in control of. Some part of you has a different goal than you do. And in a real sort of shocking, surprising, twisted sort of way, sometimes or oftentimes that goal is negative. In other words, some part of you has learned to find some sort of pleasure or satisfaction or self-justification in a negative result. And this is where we're in a life coaching context, we sort of have to be, it's one of those fuzzy areas because we learn this stuff in childhood. Where, and so say, for example, someone is experiencing a lot of rejection, and it's like they're not shy, but it's sort of like they're predicting that everyone is going to hate their work, and essentially people are going to disapprove and reject and so on and so forth. And because of anticipating those things, they either do a crappy job because it doesn't matter anyways, right? Everyone's going to hate it no matter what, or they don't do it. They avoid and procrastinate and so forth. That is self-sabotage. And of course, consciously, they want to succeed, right? And it just, right?
It baffles them. It baffles. Like they'll come to me and say, "Why do I self-sabotage?"
That's right. I would say that unconsciously, some part of them is trained toward rejection. And that pattern is probably a pattern that started a long time ago with being rejected on a consistent basis. And what happens when that happens in childhood and so forth, that we have to find a way to tolerate it. We have, right? If I have a really critical person in my life every single day growing up, for example, I have to find a way to tolerate it. And so by familiarizing it, by emotionally sugarcoating it, by oftentimes leaning into it. So you see the young 5-year-old boy with a critical mother, or by that age, you can watch him. He's learned just how to push mom's buttons, make her mad at him, and giggle about it, right?
Yes.
So he's turned it into a game. He's turned getting rejected into something that he can giggle about, and that's how he survives it. That's how he tolerates it. That's how he gets through it. The problem is we leave childhood with these kinds of patterns in place where clearly, consciously, I don't want to be rejected, but unconsciously, I have this pattern where I end up thinking, seeking it out, believing it's inevitable, even sort of strangely experiencing it as where I belong or home or what's inevitable or it's the devil that I know kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so I will often say we will seek out a familiar misery over a foreign happiness every time, right?
Yes.
What's foreign is scary. So if rejection is what's familiar and you know you can survive it, you've learned to tolerate it, you've even found some self-justification in it, then you will unconsciously make it happen again and again and again, even though there's no longer a reason to. And so I say to clients, let's just imagine, once they sort of have this context, let's just imagine that you have an unconscious goal to experience rejection. And now the challenge is to catch yourself reaching that goal, to go through the day and find all the ways in which you're interpreting the world as rejecting you so that you can have your rejection moment and stay in that familiar place, right? Mm-hmm. It's amazing. People go through and they're like, they go into work and they walk past someone in the hall who doesn't say hi and they go, geez, they don't like me. They don't even say hi to me and so forth. It's like, well, there it is. I just reached my goal. I walked past someone in the hall. They didn't acknowledge me. And I interpreted that as a major rejection.
Yes.
Or they text someone who doesn't text back right away and they went, oh, geez, there it goes again. I'm bugging them. They don't want to hear from me. Well, there it is. I just reached my goal again. It's like, okay, I have a report or a presentation that I'm working on. They go, oh my gosh, it's just people are going to think I'm such an idiot. Well, there it is. I reached my goal again. It's like, how many times a day are we reaching this strange, twisted, unconscious goal of experiencing rejection? And it's when people realize they're seeking it out that is the empowering moment, because now they understand themselves a little bit more. They're able to deal with that part of them a little bit more. And when they become conscious of that goal, that's when they can begin to have a choice about it. I mean, we can't have a conscious choice about things that remain unconscious, right? We're not aware of them. But once we become aware of this pattern and we catch ourselves doing it all the time, we then can have more conscious choice about it and stop doing it. So that's my, in a nutshell, version of how self-sabotage can work.
Fantastic. I love it. It takes quite a bit of self-awareness, though. Right? If someone goes through their day, like they have to be really committed to developing that awareness. Like, oh my God, there it is again.
There it is again. That's right. And what's amazing is sometimes people go, oh my gosh, it's ridiculous. And they stop doing it. Like it's transformative the moment they notice it. Other people go, oh, there it is again. And they can't get out of it. Mm-hmm. There are other types of unconscious goals we talk about, such as control. And this is, we call it an attachment to control. It's an attachment to being controlled by other people, by circumstances in life, mm-hmm. and so forth, and by substances, and so forth. And we can totally understand it, and yet light up a cigarette or eat food we shouldn't eat, and we sort of know I am totally choosing to be controlled by this so that, I'm in this familiar place of feeling out of control, or that my life is being controlled and so forth. And yet we can't stop doing it, right? Mm-hmm. And it can take weeks or months of continuing to be aware of it before we develop the choice.
Yes.
Yeah. And the other quick thing is, it's surprising when you get into working with people at that level, and myself as well, how conflicted we can be about it, right? How difficult it can be once we have a choice to make a different choice, right? It's almost like I've been doing this rejection thing my whole entire life, right?
Yes.
It's what I know. It's who I am. How am I going to live? I can't live without it, right? I mean, we start to have thoughts like that, and that sort of shows us how ingrained some of these patterns are.
Yes, I agree with you. It is really interesting because often from my side of the office, it looks like just a mind shift, just a choice. Like, do you really want to feel controlled, let's say, right? Are you attached to being controlled? Are you attached to, sometimes that turns up as obligation, right? Like, oh, no, I can never do that or say that. I have to. The have to start happening, right? I have to pick up the phone when my mother calls, or I have to do this, or I have to do that, those types of things.
Right.
And it's that internal sense of attachment to that, and then thinking, okay, they often really don't see that there's a choice there.
Exactly. Somebody asked me a favor. I have to say yes. In other words, the power is always outside of me, and my fate is determined elsewhere. And some of us learn that it's safer that way, right? Or what have you. And the idea of taking control and exercising choice and suffering the consequences of those choices and so on and so forth is terrifying, right?
Yes, yeah. Well, it's suffering either way, right? It can be on this side, it's suffering, right?
Right, exactly.
But the unknown is also suffering too. It's like, that's scary, right? To move into something different.
Exactly. I always think it's a really important point when somebody says, oh my gosh, this seeking rejection thing, it's like it's bigger than me. I don't know who I would be without it. I always think that is just such an important moment, right? Because it's like we're owning it, and we're sort of grasping how immense it is, right? And we're realizing then it's like, who will I be without this? And that raises the question. It's like, okay, let's talk about that.
Yes.
Who will you be without this? And the answer usually is you will be you and all of your wonderful qualities without this attachment to rejection. That's the only difference, right?
Yes.
But it's really important to wrap our minds around that, because we can define ourselves by these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think often with hypnosis, we go into, well, perhaps you would be someone different or something different, or you would feel something different. And what do you want to feel, or what do you want to be? And rewriting it that way. I think that can happen regardless of the delivery method, right? Whether that's through NLP or coaching or hypnosis or regular therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, like what kind of delivery method isn't as important as the shifts happening.
I agree. These kinds of changes can happen, on the therapist couch, or hypnosis, NLP, life coaching, or a mentor relationship, or through a deep friendship. I mean, through so many different mediums, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah. So we are coming to the end of our time.
That was fast.
Yes, it was fast. And I'm going to ask you a question. I don't know if you get asked this all the time, but I know you have 8 children, correct? Okay. Any parenting tips for the parents out there?
Yes, I have a couple. One, this too shall pass.
Oh, thank God.
Right. And really that is really referencing developmental psychology, right? Mm-hmm. That children go through phases, and I find, looking back, because my kids are mostly grown and on with their own lives. We have 2 at home still, and in the next couple of years they'll be gone. I find that most of the things I stressed out about or argued with my kids about or what have you were developmental things, that stuff that they grew out of, right? Mm-hmm. And that it's not that you can now just ignore everything and say they'll grow out of it. No, but if you realize this is a phase, it's a developmental phase, even study. If you're a parent, you should be studying some version of child development, just to lock into your mind that there are different phases, and we do grow out of things, and that development actually continues for the rest of our lives, right? But yes, if you just know that, then there will be a faith and a confidence, and you'll be more grounded as a parent, and your corrections to your children, if you will, won't come out of fear that, oh my God, they were blowing it here, and this 12-year-old kid is going to end up being a sociopath or what have you, right? No, they're not. And so if you are not parenting out of that fear and realize they are going to grow out of it, then you'll just be a little bit more chilled out, and your corrections will be more effective, I think. So that's probably the main thing.
Fantastic. Thank you. Very good advice.
I haven't been asked that on a podcast yet, and I'm glad you did.
Oh, yeah. No, great answer. And I'm going to tape it onto my mirror, with 2 teenagers in the house.
Oh my gosh. Right. And when it's so many parents enter, and I did myself, when my sweet young children started turning into teenagers, and suddenly it's like, you're rejecting me. Wait, I'm a person too. I have feelings. You can't stop me, right? It's like I ended up back in therapy. But that's just one of the phases they have to go through.
It is. It's funny that you say sociopath too, because I would say that's one of the top things that psychologists fear is my kid's either going to get a head injury or be a sociopath.
Right. Yeah.
And my therapist told me once there's very little diagnostic difference between adolescents and a sociopath. So she said, so don't worry about it. Same kind of advice.
The difference is adolescents grow out of it.
Yes.
Right? A non-sociopathic adolescent
exactly.
Grow out of it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here.
You bet. It's been great. It's been really great. Thank you, Elizabeth. I really appreciate it.
Can you please let people know how to find you?
Sure. You can go to iNLPcenter.org. That's our website that has all of our personal development stuff on it, as well as all of our trainings. I also wrote a short Kindle book called Your Achilles Heel, not heel, but eel. Mm-hmm. And that book is a breakdown of the self-sabotage model that we talked about earlier.
Oh, fantastic. So
yeah.
That'll be a really good read for people. Great. Okay, so that will also be in the show notes for everyone. And again, it was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
You bet. Thanks, Elizabeth.
I hope you truly enjoyed today's episode. Remember that you can get free hypnosis downloads over at my website, drlizhypnosis.com, DRLIZ hypnosis.com. I work all over the world doing hypnosis. So if you're interested in working with me, please schedule a free consultation over at my website, and we'll see what your goals are and if I can be of service to you in helping you reach them. Finally, if you liked today's episode, please subscribe to the podcast or tell a friend. That way, more and more people learn about the power of hypnosis. All right, everyone, have a wonderful week. Peace.